Okay, well, here we are. We're going to be talking about deck stuff, the different types of decks in the game. Isn't that right, Orange?
Yep, we're going to be talking about the five basic, basically just the five basic deck strategies in Combo Masters.
Yes. So, we're going to be starting with one turn kill.
Yep. I'll take the reins on this one to start
Yes.
because
So,
uh, as I have climbed to championships of every single Combo Masters tournament, all two of them, using one turn kill. Even so, I do not think it's the best strategy in the game. I really don't. It's just I am good at it, so that's what I use.
why don't you think that it's the best strategy in the game?
It is the easiest strategy, in my opinion, to counter.
Hmm.
I think maybe burn is the only one that I think is worse, honestly, than one turn kill.
Interesting. Okay, well,
Because
what's the main strategy behind one turn kill?
well, basically, uh, so as the name says, you want to deal 50 damage or more to your opponent. The best you can do in one turn kill is to be able to do 64, so that Honey Bear Super Spud cannot make them win or like make them survive it.
Yeah.
But basically, you want to be able to take out no matter how much life they have as soon as you activate your chain.
Yes.
And the core of that is actually, this is the base of any one turn kill deck, in my opinion, is this guy.
Oh, that guy.
Honey Bear, combined with, as you were saying, Buff Kid.
So why Honey Bear and Buff Kid specifically? And I'm gonna hover over the card so that I don't think they can see it anyway.
Okay. Well, so I'm going to start with Buff Kid. Its effect: all attacks in this chain played after this card deal +2 damage. So it must be played fourth in your chain, which generally means that you kind of get stuck with uh, it only boosts 3 other cards, but even then, that's an extra 6 damage, which most attack cards in the game deal less than 6 damage anyways, so that's good. But then you pair it up with requirement cards such as Blue Flame Punch, as was seen multiple times in the tournament by me, which has the ability to discard any card you want from your chain, so you're able to
Or any
move.
amount of cards.
Yeah, so you're able to move Buff Kid to the back and boost all other 7, which makes Buff Kid deal an extra 14 damage in your chain.
Which is a monstrous amount of damage.
So, and then again, a lot of people sleep on this. I think I'm the only player I've seen do it in a game. And that is Buff Kid is an uncommon, so not only you can have 2 of it in your deck, you can have 2 of it in your chain. So
It is pretty
that
hard to pull off, though.
but every time I've done it, I've won instantly. You shouldn't aim for it, but it is something to
Yes.
have. So basically, I do not. Buff Kid by itself can lead you to one turn kill. Um, but I think Honey Bear, the reason I brought out first is Honey Bear and these 2 cards right here are how I've won my tournaments.
Yes.
Uh, so basically, Honey Bear doubles the effect of your item card. So on Knife Sword, it will quadruple uh, the damage of a knife card. So a card like Knife Storm, if you want to drag that in. Um,
Knife Storm, yes. Knife Storm.
uh,
It deals
knife,
6 damage.
yeah. So your Knife Storm here would deal 24 damage. Yeah, it would deal 24 damage by itself without any other modifiers. Then all other non-knife weapon attacks get +2. Now I'm not going to go too depth into that because that'll be more of a knife archetype. But then you get all of that damage plus the like extra 14 potentially from Buff Kid. And then Pumpkin Sword is basically Pumpkin Sword's actual effect. It gives +2 damage for every melee card in your chain. So then the Honey Bear makes that +4. So again, if you have a Buff Kit at the end, that's 7 cards. So you end up with an extra 28 damage from your Pumpkin Sword alone.
Yes. Which is more than enough if you combine that with the other knife cards.
Just that and a perfectly used Buff Kid by itself is what, 42 damage? So then you need to do 8 more and you've won the game.
Mm.
I mean, I think it's time to, because I was going to move on to why this is not a good strategy.
Well,
anyways.
I was going to talk about the counter, a big counter to it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, well, I'll have to edit this, but a good counter to one-turn kill decks, if I can find it, is actually, if you can pull it off, surprise stab, which makes your opponent, like, if they tap their chain, if they activate it on their turn, you play this card, and then they have to wait until the next turn to activate it, which might give you enough time to kill them first.
Yeah, this is how Mozz almost won the latest tournament.
Yes, that is how I almost won the tournament. I feel like other counters to a one-turn kill deck would be nukes. Nukes can also be not a great counter, but a decent counter to them, because you can make them discard some of their damaging cards. It discards a card from both of your chains. And then there's one other card. It's around here somewhere. Crab Maga. That card can also, because it discards their item card, you could discard the Pumpkin Sword or the Knife Sword. And then that would ruin their strategy. So those are some. Do you have any counters that you know of?
I was going to just elaborate as to why these are big counters, and that's because when you build a one-turn kill deck, in order for things like Crab Maga and Nuke to not be complete counters, what you do is, at least in my case, and I mean, I am undefeated in tournaments, is to load up the deck with attack cards. Which in turn, the reason why this is so bad is you load them up because you don't want to clutter your chain, because you need all 8 slots to finish to be able to deal over 50 damage.
Which means there's a lack of healing?
Yeah, because you'll see if you check out any of the battles in the final, Mozz managed to beat me because he flipped Surprise Stab and was able to do 26 damage the next turn, which is pretty feasible in one chain, because I had to dedicate my whole chain into killing him instead of dealing that final damage.
Yes.
Or instead of healing, rather.
Yes. So, but it is, I mean, it's not a bad strategy, it just depends how you go about it.
It's certainly good, but the problem is you have to build it a certain way, and so if your opponent is expecting a one-turn kill deck, you can easily lose.
Also, one more counter is if it has melee or magic, I mean, not melee or magic creature type cards, if that's what they're relying on, then you can also discard one of their cards with Smile Guy.
Especially that removes the Honey Bear from their chain.
It does, which is a counter that I just realized, and I will most certainly use against you in the future.
Hey.
Oh, and no. I keep pulling out counters now. Wallman is another counter. because he negates all of your opponent's damage on your next turn. There's a lot of them now.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. One turn kill, I think, is one of the worst strategies.
himself also can be not necessarily a counter, but he definitely makes it harder for your opponent to achieve that one turn kill because he adds essentially 8 health to you, and then you can double that to get 16 health. So that's quite a bit of health. I believe that's like all the main counters. I'm sure that there's like
that essentially gets the gist though of how, while it's the most satisfying way to win, it's certainly one of the harder ways. And there's a reason why I was the only OTK deck in the tournament.
One final counter to it is Sludge Blob, and Sludge Blob is a counter to it because he basically clogs up your opponent's chain, and since you can have 2 of them in your deck, that could mean 2 of their spots that are just not usable.
Yeah.
And you generally need all of your spots to be dealing damage in a one-turn kill deck. But I think that's it for one-turn kill, right?
I think so.
What is next, sir?
Next, I want to talk about the classic mid-range strategy, which is basically you control the flow of the game until the end when you go aggro and win. It's the most classic deck style.
What's funny is that there's actually a lack of mid-range decks in Combo Masters, which is kind of weird.
But there is a specific archetype that I think will make anybody get the gist of it and be able to do it for themselves.
And what would that
with other cards? That would be these guys, the worms.
Yes, the worms.
I had a feeling you knew where I was going with that.
You have all of the worms.
Oh yeah, I do have them in my hand.
In your hand, so I figured you were going with the worms. But.
Yeah, so the worm archetype is interesting because they were essentially the original OTK back when it was a 30 health game. But now that the rules have shifted after playtesting, they've still stayed as a pretty stable archetype, but they've completely switched strategies, and that is to be mid-range. Because the worms don't do that much damage.
No.
It's a decent amount, but it's nothing too bad. They've got like Boss Worm, or Evil Worm.
Dapper Worm himself.
They've got Gummy Worm, they've got Evil Worm, but so as you can see, they don't do that much damage.
No, they
don't. So with them, but they also don't require that much of your chain. So in a mid-range and combo masters, this is the best example because you kind of keep yourself healed up with things like Sad Doggo if you want to drag that down.
Yes, Sad Doggo herself. I'll put it on my side.
And then at the end of... And so in a mid-range deck, one of the big differences is you're going to use... You want to beat your opponent in, I would say, about 3 combos. And from there, you slowly chip them down, and then towards the end, you have cards like Dapper Worm, which deal 1 damage for every worm in your discard pile.
So he's a good one to play post, like, your big chain as a kind of finale.
Exactly. While cards like Happy Worm, because they heal 2 health when you activate your chain, keep you alive, as well as your doggos. Because I think the worms and doggos work very well together for a mid-range deck.
I feel like doggos kind of work with every deck except OTK, but and aggro.
Yeah.
I guess they only work with like control.
I would say control and mid-range are by far their best. Burn for somewhat. but you have Dapper Worm that can get incredibly strong later.
Yes.
And then you have the boss of the archetype, Gargantuan Worm, with a monster 12 damage, as well as Gargantuan Snack Time to power up all of your worms. Now, part of the reason why I I would call mid range a pretty safe strategy in Combo Masters. Um, and I mean, I would say that the people that got knocked out in the early rounds of the tournament were all kind of running mid range, where they just wanted to deal damage based on how their chain was looking. So, but I would honestly, not to disrespect the play style, but I personally don't recommend mid range unless you're learning the game.
Okay, so we're back, and we were talking about mid range, but I do not remember at all what we were talking about.
I think we're starting to address the counters.
Yes. So, what would you say are the counters to mid range?
The counters for mid range is more how much your opponent. They're not great for when an opponent can heal a lot. It doesn't even necessarily have to be control, but if they're just able to throw out a bunch of sad doggos, a bunch of mint drops, like cards like this that heal 4 or 8, it can really start to hammer down on a mid-range deck because you have to wait towards the end game, which means if by the end game when you start going aggro they still have too much health, it can be an issue as you escalate, as well as honestly, I would say control is a pretty big counter to this deck because not the biggest, but if at the beginning you lose your flow from cards like Abomination, which make it so you can't draw on your next turn,
Yes.
and cards like Demon Pig, which discards cards from your hand.
Or
If
Quack Bomb, even, which does the
yeah,
same thing as Demon Pig.
yeah, all these cards that like discard or kind of stop you or heal. This is why I'm not the biggest fan of mid range, even though I have ran decks of it in the past. It is a nice, safe progression. But the problem is that it's easier to counter just due to the fact that you have to kind of keep the game in your favor at the beginning, but then be able to still do enough damage to kill your opponent at the end.
Yeah.
However, I do think mid range is interesting. I think it's the only deck style in Combo Masters they can get away with not having a single use for every card in your deck, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Like in my deck, my tournament deck, I had a French Fry Henchman, which basically just discards a card from your chain and then discards. That was very situational, never came up. But I just had to be prepared for that. I feel like you can kind of avoid that in a mid-range deck. All of your cards can have their own purpose at all times.